The stars were dying. Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching another world burn. Through the massive viewport, he could see the once beautiful planet of Caridian Prime being consumed by the endless black mass of void swarm ships. Each vessel in the enemy fleet looked like a living nightmare, with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with dark energy. The crystalline hegemony had lost 12 worlds in the past month. The Aquatic Federation had lost 8. Even the mighty Silicon Empire with their massive metal warships had been forced to retreat from their outer colonies. The Galactic Council's greatest fear was coming true. The Void Swarm was winning. "Sir, we're receiving reports from the 7th Fleet," his communications officer said. The young crystalline's voice was shaking. "They've lost contact with Admiral Vrextel's forces. We think they're all gone." Zethkar closed his 4 eyes for a moment. The 7th Fleet had contained over 50,000 ships. 50,000 ships, each with crews of hundreds or thousands of beings, all gone in less than 6 hours. The math was terrifying. At this rate, the Council would run out of ships before the year was over. The enemy was unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. The Void Swarm ships didn't follow normal rules of war. They didn't need supply lines or fuel stops. They ate energy from the weapons fired at them. When they were damaged, they simply absorbed nearby matter to rebuild themselves. They had turned every weapon the Council possessed against them. "Admiral," called his tactical officer, "the Council is requesting all remaining fleet commanders to join an emergency meeting." "Very well. Put it on the main screen." The viewport flickered and showed the familiar blue glow of the Council chambers. But where once hundreds of representatives from dozens of species had gathered, now only a few dozen remained. Many of their homeworlds had already fallen to the swarm. The Council President, an ancient being from the first species, looked tired beyond measure. His metallic face showed deep lines that hadn't been there a year ago. "Fleet commanders," the President began, "I will not waste time with false hope. Our current situation is desperate. We have lost 60% of our combined fleets. The enemy continues to adapt to every weapon we deploy. Our scientists estimate that we have perhaps 2 months before our remaining forces are overwhelmed." A murmur went through the assembled commanders. 2 months. It seemed like a long time, but Zethkar knew it wasn't. The swarm was accelerating their attacks. Each victory made them stronger. Each defeat made the Council weaker. "However," the President continued, "we do have one final option. An option that many of you will find distasteful." The screen showed a star map of the galaxy. At the very edge, in a small spiral arm that most civilized species avoided, a single system was highlighted in red. "The Death World species," someone whispered. Zethkar felt his crystal body grow cold. He had heard stories about the beings from that distant system. They called themselves humans, and they came from a world so dangerous that most Council members couldn't believe any intelligent life could have evolved there. Their planet had extreme weather, poisonous atmosphere in some regions, and predators that would make a swarm warrior think twice. "The humans have been observing our conflict," the President said. "Our long-range sensors have detected their scout ships at the edges of several battle zones. They have not interfered, but they have been watching, learning." "They're primitives," Admiral Kethmore of the Iron Worlds protested. "They only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their technology is centuries behind ours. What could they possibly do that our combined fleets cannot?" The President's expression didn't change. "Perhaps nothing. But we are running out of alternatives. Intelligence reports suggest that while their technology may seem primitive, their approach to warfare is unique. They have never lost a war on their homeworld. Not once in their recorded history." Zethkar thought about that. The crystal hegemony had been at peace for 300 years before the swarm arrived. Most Council species had outlawed warfare among themselves centuries ago. But these humans, they had been fighting each other right up until they reached the stars. "What are you proposing?" asked Admiral Nixra of the Gaseous Collective. "A formal request for military assistance. We would be asking a Death World species to help us in a war that our advanced civilizations cannot win." The silence that followed was heavy. Zethkar could see the pain in his fellow commanders' faces. They were beings from species that had mastered science, art, and philosophy. They had built wonders that spanned star systems. And now they were considering asking for help from creatures that still settled disputes with violence. "The alternative," the President said quietly, "is extinction." Admiral Yelsha of the Plant Kingdom spoke first. If we make this request, what guarantee do we have that they will respond? Or that they won't simply take advantage of our weakness? None, the president admitted. But intelligence suggests that the swarm's expansion will eventually reach their system as well. It may be in their interest to help us stop the threat here. Zethkar found himself thinking about his home crystal, gardens on Hegemony Prime. He thought about the billion-year-old formations that his people had carefully tended, the light symphonies that took decades to compose, the philosophical debates that could last for centuries. All of it would be gone if the swarm reached his homeworld. I support the proposal, he said finally. We have no choice. One by one, the other commanders agreed. Even Admiral Kethmore, who clearly hated the idea, gave his reluctant consent. Very well, the president said. The message will be sent immediately. All fleets are to continue defensive operations while we wait for a response. May the ancient lights preserve us all. The transmission ended, leaving Zethkar staring once again at the burning world before him. Somewhere in the distance, another swarm ship was emerging from the planet's surface, carrying with it the consumed matter of an entire civilization. He wondered what kind of beings they had just asked for help. The files on humans made for disturbing reading. They had evolved as persistence hunters, chasing their prey across vast distances until it died of exhaustion. Their world was so hostile that they had to fight for every resource. They had developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet and had somehow managed not to use them. But most disturbing of all were the reports from the few council observers who had actually visited their system. The humans didn't just fight to survive. They seemed to enjoy it. They had turned warfare into an art form, developing strategies and tactics that the galaxy's greatest military minds found hard to understand. Sir, his communications officer said, we're receiving new swarm movement reports. It looks like they're massing for another major assault. Where? The Aegis system. If they take Aegis Prime, they'll have a clear path to the Council Core worlds. Zethkar felt his crystal structure dim with worry. Aegis Prime was the fortress world where the Council had been gathering their remaining fleets. It was their last major stronghold. If it fell, the war would effectively be over. How long until they reach Aegis? He asked. At current speed, approximately 72 hours, 3 days. The Council had 3 days to receive a response from the humans and somehow convince them to help. 3 days before the final battle began, Zethkar looked out at the stars and wondered if he would live to see them again. Somewhere out there, beyond the rim of known space, a species that had never known peace was deciding whether to save a galaxy that had never known real war. The irony was not lost on him. The civilized species of the galaxy, who had spent centuries perfecting peace and harmony, were about to place their fate in the hands of beings they considered savage. But as another swarm ship rose from the dying world below, Zethkar realized that perhaps it took savages to fight monsters. The message was already traveling through hyperspace, carrying with it the desperate plea of a dying galaxy. Soon they would learn whether the creatures from the death world would answer their call, and if they did, whether that would be salvation or simply a different kind of doom. The message arrived at Titan Station at 0347 hours, Earth Standard Time. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen was already awake, studying tactical reports in her private office when the priority alert chimed. She had been expecting this call for months. Hell, if she was being honest, she had been expecting it for years. Ma'am, came the voice of her aide through the comm system. We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. Priority 1. They're requesting immediate assistance. Put it through to my secure terminal, Chen replied, setting down her coffee. The ceramic mug bore the insignia of the Human Defense Consortium and the words "Peace through superior firepower" in bold letters. The hologram that appeared above her desk showed a tall, crystalline being with 4 eyes and a voice like wind chimes, Admiral Zethkar of the Crystal Hegemony, according to the identification data. He looked desperate. Humans of Earth, the alien began. I am Admiral Zethkar speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. Our civilization faces extinction at the hands of an enemy we cannot defeat. The Void Swarm has consumed half our territories and shows no signs of stopping. We are formally requesting military assistance from your species. Chen paused the message and leaned back in her chair. Around her office, the walls were covered with tactical displays showing ship movements throughout human space. Earth's military had been tracking the war between the Council and the Swarm for 3 years now. They had observed every major battle, analyzed every tactical decision, and studied both sides with the cold precision that had made humanity the apex predator of their homeworld. She resumed the message. The alien continued with details about their losses, their failed strategies, and their desperate situation. When it ended, Chen sat in silence for several minutes. Then she smiled. "Aria," she said to the ship's artificial intelligence, "patch me through to Strategic Command. Authorization Chen Alpha 77. Connection established. Admiral." The AI replied in its pleasant female voice. The hologram shifted to show General Marcus Torres, the gruff old Marine who commanded Earth's Strategic Operations Division. Despite the early hour, he looked wide awake. "Sarah," he said with a grin, "please tell me that was what I think it was." "The Council just formally requested our assistance," Chen confirmed. "The Swarm has them on the ropes. They're gathering their remaining fleets at Aegis Prime for what looks like a final stand." "Outstanding. How long do we have?" Chen called up the tactical data on her secondary screen. "Intelligence suggests the Swarm will reach Aegis in 72 hours. They're moving fast, probably trying to end this before the Council can organize any more resistance." "Perfect. Operation Thunderbolt is ready to deploy. We've been running simulations for 6 months now. The boys are eager to test their new toys," Chen nodded. Operation Thunderbolt was humanity's answer to the Void Swarm. While the rest of the galaxy had been fighting a losing war, Earth scientists and engineers had been busy developing weapons specifically designed to counter the Swarm's advantages. "General, initiate Phase 1 deployment immediately. I want the entire First Fleet ready to move within 18 hours. "You got it. What about the Council? Are we going to coordinate with them?" "Negative. This operation works best if we maintain complete tactical surprise. The Council forces are to stand down once we arrive. We'll handle the Swarm ourselves." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Think that's wise. They might not appreciate being sidelined in their own war." "Marcus, have you seen their battle records? In 3 years of fighting, they haven't won a single major engagement against the Swarm. Their tactics are predictable, their weapons are ineffective, and their commanders think like politicians instead of soldiers. They'll just get in our way." The general chuckled. "Fair enough. I'll start the deployment. How big is our force going to be?" Chen brought up another display showing the massive fleet that had been secretly assembling in the outer solar system for the past 6 months. 10,000 ships ranging from destroyers to dreadnoughts, the largest human fleet ever assembled. And all of them equipped with the new technology? Every single one. Quantum disruptors, entropy cannons, Pandora Protocol nanites, and a few other surprises that R&D has been working on. Torres whistled low. "The Swarm's not going to know what hit them. That's the idea. This war ends in one battle, Marcus. Complete and total victory." After ending the transmission, Chen walked to her office window. Outside, she could see the sprawling shipyards of Titan Station, where thousands of workers were putting the finishing touches on humanity's war fleet. The ships looked different from anything the galaxy had seen before. Where alien vessels were elegant and streamlined, human ships were angular and brutal. They had been designed for one purpose: to kill efficiently. "Aria, bring up the historical analysis of the Council Swarm conflict." Displaying now. "Admiral." The hologram showed a detailed breakdown of every major battle in the war. Chen had studied these records countless times, but she always found new details that reinforced her confidence in humanity's approach. The Council species had made every mistake in the book. They had tried to fight the Swarm with conventional tactics, treating them like a normal enemy that could be reasoned with or outmaneuvered. They had failed to adapt when their weapons proved ineffective. Most importantly, they had never considered the possibility that some enemies could only be completely destroyed. Humans understood this instinctively. Earth's history was filled with conflicts where survival meant the total annihilation of the enemy. Humanity had evolved in an environment where mercy was often weakness, where the species that hesitated went extinct. "Aria, display the Swarm tactical analysis." New data appeared, showing the biological and technological capabilities of the enemy. The Swarm ships were impressive in their own way. They could adapt to energy weapons by developing resistance. They could repair themselves by consuming local matter. They could coordinate perfectly through a hive, mind that spanned light years. but they had weaknesses that the Council had been too civilized to exploit. The swarm's hive mind depended on quantum entanglement communication. Disrupt that, and their perfect coordination became chaos. Their adaptive capabilities worked by analyzing incoming threats and developing countermeasures. Hit them with something that changed the fundamental laws of physics, and their adaptation became irrelevant. Their ability to consume matter for repairs was impressive, but it became a liability when that matter was converted into something hostile. Chen had spent 2 years developing the counter-strategies that would exploit these weaknesses. The weapons were ready. The tactics were tested. The crews were trained. "Admiral," Area announced. "Incoming transmission from Captain Rodriguez of the Dreadnought Nemesis." "Put him through." The hologram showed a stocky man with graying hair and cold eyes. Captain Diego Rodriguez had commanded the Nemesis through 3 major operations and had never lost a battle. "Admiral Chen, the fleet is reporting ready status. All ships have completed final system checks and are loaded with the new munitions." "Excellent, Captain." "What's the mood among the crews?" Rodriguez grinned. "They're ready for a fight, ma'am. We've been watching the Council forces get pushed around for 3 years. The boys are eager to show the galaxy how Earth handles business." Chen nodded. She had personally selected every captain in the fleet based on their combat records and their ability to make hard decisions under pressure. These were not explorers or diplomats. They were warriors, and they were very good at their job. "Captain, I want you to understand something," she said. "This is not a rescue mission. This is not about saving the Council or preserving galactic civilization. This is about eliminating a threat to Earth before it reaches our space." "Understood, Admiral." "Complete annihilation of enemy forces." "Exactly. The swarm dies today, all of it. Every ship, every organism, every trace of their existence. We're not fighting to win territory or negotiate peace. We're fighting to commit genocide." Rodriguez's expression didn't change. "My crews understand the mission, ma'am. We'll get it done." After the transmission ended, Chen returned to studying the tactical displays. The Council species would probably be horrified by humanity's approach to warfare. They seemed to think that conflicts could be resolved through superior technology or clever tactics. They had never learned the most important lesson of warfare. Sometimes the only way to win was to be more ruthless than your enemy. The Void Swarm was ruthless by nature. They consumed entire worlds without hesitation. They showed no mercy to civilians or military forces. They had no concept of surrender or negotiation, but they had never faced anything like humanity. Earth species had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing. They had developed nuclear weapons before they achieved interstellar flight. They had fought wars so brutal that entire civilizations had been wiped from existence. They had survived and thrived in an environment that would have destroyed most species before they achieved sentience. "Area, begin fleet departure sequence. All ships are to jump to hyperspace on my mark." "Aye, Admiral. Fleet reports ready for hyperspace translation." Chen looked out at the stars one last time. Somewhere beyond the visible spectrum, 10,000 human warships were preparing to enter hyperspace. Each one carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Each one was crewed by beings who understood that sometimes peace could only be achieved through overwhelming. The Aegis system looked like the end of everything. Admiral Zethkar stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Crystal Symphony, and watched as the largest fleet in galactic history prepared for what would likely be their final battle. Nearly 2 million ships from every Council species filled the space around Aegis Prime, their running lights creating a constellation of defiance against the approaching darkness. But even this massive force felt small compared to what was coming. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "long-range sensors are detecting the swarm advance force. They'll be here in 6 hours. 6 hours." Zethkar closed his 4 eyes and tried to calm his crystalline nerves. The Council's combined fleet was impressive, but he had seen impressive fleets destroyed before. The swarm had a way of turning strength into weakness, of making every advantage work against you. "What's our current force composition?" he asked. 1.7 million combat vessels, came the reply. The Silicon Empire contributed 400,000 ships, the Aquatic Federation 300,000, our hegemony 200,000. The rest are distributed among the remaining species. The numbers sounded powerful, but Zethkar knew better. In the past 3 years, the Council had fielded fleets almost this large before. Each time, the swarm had found a way to destroy them. Each time, the enemy had grown stronger while the Council grew weaker. "Any word from the humans?" he asked. His communications officer, a young crystal named Veltar, shook his head. No response to our request for assistance, sir. Our long-range sensors haven't detected any human ships in this sector. Zethkar wasn't surprised. The humans had observed several council battles without interfering. They were probably watching from somewhere beyond sensor range, studying both sides with the cold analytical approach that made them so disturbing. Still, he had hoped. The desperate message sent to their distant system had been the Council's last gamble. If the humans had decided not to help, then this battle would truly be the end. Sir, Admiral Kethmore is requesting a tactical conference, Veltar announced. Put him through. The hologram showed the massive form of Admiral Kethmore, his metallic features set in grim determination. Behind him, Zethkar could see the Bridge of the Iron Will, the largest dreadnought in the Silicon Empire's fleet. Zethkar, Kethmore rumbled in his bass voice. My deep-range scouts report that the swarm main force is even larger than our intelligence estimated. We're looking at approximately 3 million enemy vessels. Zethkar felt his crystal structure grow cold. 3 million ships. The swarm had somehow assembled a force half again as large as the Council's final fleet. How is that possible, he asked. Our projections showed they had at most 2 million vessels. They've been converting matter from the worlds they've consumed, Admiral Nixra of the Gaseous Collective interjected, her image appearing alongside Kethmore's. Each planet they devour provides material for thousands of new ships. They're not just conquering our territory, AudioBook. They're using it to build a larger army. The tactical display updated to show the approaching swarm fleet. The enemy vessels formed a dark cloud that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each ship pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that made them look like deep-sea predators rising from an ocean of stars. What's our battle plan? Asked Admiral Yelshaw of the Plant Kingdoms. Kethmore's expression was grim. We've arranged our forces in a sphere formation around Aegis Prime. The idea is to make them fight through multiple layers of defense. The outer sphere will engage first, falling back through the middle sphere to the inner sphere if necessary. And if the inner sphere falls? Zethkar asked, though he already knew the answer. Then Aegis Prime is lost and the war is over. The tactical conference continued for another hour, going over deployment details and contingency plans. But Zethkar could see the truth in his fellow commander's eyes. They were going through the motions of planning a battle they didn't expect to win. The Council species had fought bravely for 3 years, but they had never developed a truly effective weapon against the swarm. Their energy weapons were absorbed and converted into power for the enemy ships. Their kinetic weapons were consumed and used as raw material for repairs. Their most advanced missiles were caught by organic tendrils and incorporated into the swarm fleet. Sir, Veltar said quietly after the conference ended, we're receiving a transmission from the surface of Aegis Prime. Put it through. The hologram showed President Dexalon in the Council's Emergency Command Center. The ancient leader looked even more worn than he had during their last conversation. Behind him, Zethkar could see staff members rushing back and forth, preparing for evacuation. Admiral Zethkar, the president said, I want you to know that regardless of what happens in the coming battle, the Council is proud of your service. You and your fellow commanders have fought with honor against an impossible enemy. Thank you, Mr. President, Zethkar replied. We will do our duty. I have one final order for you, Dexalon continued. If the battle is lost, if Aegis Prime falls, you are to retreat immediately. Don't sacrifice your remaining ships in a futile gesture. The galaxy will need whatever forces survive to protect the core worlds. Zethkar nodded, but he wondered how many ships would be left to retreat. The swarm rarely left survivors. Sir, his sensor operator called out. The enemy advance force is entering the outer system. First contact in approximately 1 hour. Through the viewport, Zethkar could see the distant flicker of drives as Council ships moved to intercept the first wave of swarm vessels. The outer sphere contained nearly 500,000 ships, the largest single formation the Council had ever fielded. All ships. This is Admiral Zethkar, he announced over the fleet communication channel. The enemy is approaching. Remember your training, trust your wingmates, and know that today we fight for the future of civilized life in this galaxy. The response was immediate Aurora. Millions of voices from dozens of species acknowledging his words. Despite everything, despite the fear and the desperate odds, the Council fleet was ready to fight. The first shots were fired 37 minutes later. Zethkar watched through his tactical display as the outer sphere engaged the swarm advance force. Energy beams and missile salvos lit up the darkness, creating a light show that could be seen from Aegis Prime. For a few moments, it looked like the Council forces might actually be winning. Several swarm ships were destroyed in the opening exchange, but then the enemy began to adapt. The next wave of energy beams seemed to pass harmlessly through the swarm ships, absorbed by hull plating that had somehow become resistant to the specific frequency being used. Missiles were caught by extending tendrils and pulled into the enemy vessels, where their explosive power was converted into propulsion. "They're learning from every attack," Admiral Kethmore reported over the tactical channel. "Each wave of our weapons is less effective than the last." Zethkar watched in horror as the outer sphere began to collapse. Council ships that had fought bravely for hours were suddenly overwhelmed as the swarm adapted to every tactic they employed. Vessels that had survived dozens of battles were consumed by organic acids or crushed by extending mechanical limbs. "Fall back to the middle sphere," he ordered. All outer sphere ships retreat immediately, but there weren't many ships left to retreat. Of the 500,000 vessels that had formed the outer sphere, perhaps 50,000 managed to escape the swarm's advance. The rest had been destroyed or absorbed into the enemy fleet. "Sir," Veltar reported, "the middle sphere is requesting permission to engage." "Granted. All middle sphere commanders, you are cleared to fire." The second wave of the battle was even more brutal than the first. The middle sphere contained the Council's most advanced ships, equipped with experimental weapons that had never been tested in combat. For a brief moment, it seemed like these new technologies might make a difference. Quantum torpedoes tore holes in space-time itself, creating gravitational anomalies that crushed several swarm vessels. Plasma cannons fired streams of matter so hot they could melt through asteroid belts. Antimatter missiles detonated with the force of small stars. But even these ultimate weapons proved insufficient. The swarm ships began to move in new patterns, using their damaged comrades as shields while extending repair tendrils to heal the wounds inflicted by the Council's most powerful attacks. Worse, some of the quantum torpedoes were somehow caught and redirected back at the Council fleet. "How are they doing that?" Admiral Nixra demanded over the communication channel. "Those torpedoes use technology that shouldn't be possible to counter." "They're adapting faster than our weapons can fire," Kethmore replied grimly. "Each shot teaches them how to defend against the next one." The middle sphere held for 2 hours before it too began to collapse. Zethkar watched his tactical display with growing despair as ship after ship disappeared from the grid. The swarm was consuming the Council's most powerful fleet like a forest fire burning through dry wood. "All remaining ships fall back to the inner sphere," he ordered. "Prepare for final defensive positions around Aegis Prime." The inner sphere was humanity's last hope. Not the Council's humanity, but the desperate hope due. The first human weapon fired at exactly 14:32:7, Galactic Standard Time. Admiral Zethkar watched from his retreating flagship as something impossible happened. The lead human vessel, Admiral Chen's dreadnought, fired what looked like a simple energy beam. But when it struck the nearest swarm ship, the enemy vessel didn't absorb the energy or adapt to it. It simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed. Not consumed. It vanished as if it had never been there at all, leaving only empty space where a massive biomechanical ship had been moments before. What kind of weapon was that? Admiral Kethmore demanded over the communication channel. Before anyone could answer, more human ships opened fire. Each weapon seemed different from the last, and each one produced effects that violated everything the Council knew about physics. One beam caused a cluster of swarm ships to age rapidly, their biomechanical hulls crumbling to dust in seconds. Another created what looked like tiny black holes that sucked enemy vessels into nothingness. But the most disturbing weapons were the ones that seemed to turn the swarm ships against themselves. "Sir," Veltar reported, his voice shaking. "The human ship designated Alpha 7 just fired something at a group of swarm vessels. The projectile appears to be replicating itself using the enemy ships as raw material." Zethkar focused his optical sensors on the area Veltar indicated. What he saw made his crystal structure go cold with terror. A small cloud of something had struck a formation of 50 swarm ships. Within seconds, the cloud had somehow converted those ships into more copies of itself. The new cloud then split and attacked other enemy vessels, converting them as well. Self-replicating weaponry, he whispered. They're turning the swarm's own mass against them. The human weapons weren't just destroying the enemy fleet, they were converting it into more human weapons. Each destroyed swarm ship became part of the attacking force. What had started as 10,000 human vessels was rapidly becoming 20,000, then 30,000. Admiral Chen, Admiral Nixra called over the channel, "What is that technology? How are you converting enemy ships?" The human admiral's response was calm and matter-of-fact. Pandora Protocol nanites. They disassemble matter at the molecular level and rebuild it into predetermined configurations. In this case, automated weapon platforms. The casualness with which he described technology that could reshape matter itself left the council commanders speechless. Zethkar found himself wondering what kind of species would develop such weapons and then deploy them without hesitation. But the humans weren't finished demonstrating their capabilities. As the swarm fleet began to react to the impossible assault, trying to adapt their formations and defenses, the human ships deployed their second type of weapon. Energy beams that looked like twisted space began firing from dozens of vessels, and wherever they struck, the carefully coordinated swarm formations fell apart. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the swarm ships are losing coordination. Their formation patterns are breaking down." "How is that possible?" Zethkar asked. "The hive mind should be able to maintain coordination regardless of local damage." Admiral Chen's voice came over the channel again as if she had heard his question. "Quantum disruptors, Admiral. They interfere with the entanglement communication that links the swarm hive mind. Cut the puppet strings and the puppets can't dance." Zethkar watched in amazement as the perfectly coordinated swarm fleet began to move like individual ships instead of a unified organism. Vessels that had moved with precise timing now collided with each other. Attack formations dissolved into chaos as ships lost their ability to communicate with the central intelligence. But the weapon that truly broke the swarm was the third type of armament the humans deployed. From the largest human dreadnoughts came beams of energy that seemed to bend space itself. When these beams struck swarm ships, something fundamental changed about the local physics. Gravity worked differently. Time moved at altered speeds. The laws of thermodynamics seemed to reverse themselves. "Entropy cannons," Admiral Chen explained as if she were discussing the weather. "They create localized fields where physical laws operate differently, very effective against enemies that rely on consistent physics for their biological processes." Zethkar watched a cluster of swarm ships get caught in one of these entropy fields. The biomechanical vessels began to break apart as their organic components aged at different rates than their mechanical parts. Some ships imploded as their internal gravity fields inverted. Others simply froze in time, their crews trapped in temporal bubbles. "This is impossible," Admiral Kethmore said, his voice filled with awe and terror. "No species should have access to technology that can alter the fundamental laws of physics." "We don't alter them," came Admiral Chen's reply. "We just apply them more creatively than most species consider ethical." The word ethical hung in the space between the fleets like a dark omen. Zethkar realized that the humans hadn't just developed superior weapons. They had developed weapons that other species wouldn't use even if they could build them. The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for 37 minutes. By the end, 3 million swarm ships had been reduced to cosmic dust and converted matter. The human fleet, which had started with 10,000 vessels, now numbered over 50,000 as the Pandora Protocol nanites continued to convert enemy material into automated weapon platforms. But more importantly, the swarm was learning something they had never experienced before: fear. Zethkar could see it in their movement patterns. The perfect coordination was gone, but so was the relentless advance that had characterized every previous battle. For the first time in recorded history, swarm ships were retreating. "Sir," Veltar reported, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the direction of swarm space. It looks like they're trying to jump to hyperspace." "The survivors are trying to escape," Admiral Nixra observed. Admiral Chen's voice cut across the channel one final time. "Negative. There are no survivors." As she spoke, the converted human weapons began to change configuration again. The ship-sized platforms merged together, forming massive structures that looked like nothing in any galactic database. These new constructs began to emit energy fields that stretched across light years, creating barriers that prevented hyperspace jumps. Interdiction field generators, Chen explained. Nothing leaves this system until we allow it. The remaining swarm ships, perhaps a few 100,000 out of the original 3 million, found themselves trapped. They tried to form defensive formations, but the quantum disruptors had permanently damaged their hive mind communication. They tried to adapt to the human weapons, but you can't adapt to physics violations. They tried to consume local matter for repairs, but the Pandora nanites had already converted everything useful in the system. Admiral Chen, Zethkar said carefully, the remaining enemy forces appear to be attempting to surrender. There was a long pause before the human replied. When she did, her voice was colder than the space between stars. Admiral Zethkar, the swarm doesn't surrender. They consume. They adapt. They spread. The only acceptable outcome is their complete extinction. But surely some study of their technology could be beneficial. No. The word cut through space like a blade. We've studied them for 3 years. We know everything we need to know. They are a cancer that spreads through the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. You don't negotiate with cancer. You eliminate it. The final phase of the battle was the most disturbing thing Zethkar had ever witnessed. The human weapons didn't just destroy the remaining swarm ships. They followed their hyperspace trails, back to their points of origin, sending hunter-killer nanites through the quantum tunnels to sterilize every swarm world, every swarm station, every place the enemy had ever touched. Sir, his sensor operator said in a voice barely above a whisper, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy releases in the direction of swarm space. Multiple star systems are going dark. Zethkar understood what that meant. The humans weren't just winning this battle. They were committing genocide on a galactic scale, wiping out the entire swarm species in a matter of hours. When it was over, when the last energy signature faded from the sensors, the human fleet began to reconfigure itself again. The converted weapon platforms merged with the original ships, creating vessels that were larger and more powerful than anything that had existed before the battle. Admiral Chen's final transmission came through crystal clear. Council forces, the Void Swarm has been eliminated. Their home systems have been sterilized. This threat will never return. We recommend you begin reconstruction of your territories immediately. Admiral Chen, Zethkar said, his voice shaking despite his best efforts. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank you for your assistance. Your intervention has saved our civilization. Don't thank us yet, Admiral, came the reply. We didn't do this for you. We did it because the swarm would have eventually threatened Earth. Now that threat is gone, and we can focus on other priorities. Other priorities? Admiral Yelshaw asked. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Admiral. There are many threats to stable civilization. Pirates, warlords, aggressive species that might follow. 6 months later, the galaxy was a very different place. Admiral Zethkar stood in the newly constructed observation lounge of Aegis Prime, looking out at a sight that would have been impossible before the humans arrived. A fleet of mixed council and human ships patrolled the system in perfect formation, their different designs somehow working together in harmonious efficiency. But the harmony was an illusion, and everyone knew it. Admiral, his aide Veltar announced, Admiral Chen is requesting a meeting. She's aboard the human vessel Prometheus, currently docked at Station 7. Zethkar nodded. He had been expecting this meeting for weeks. The human admiral had been touring council territories, conducting what she called security assessments of every major system. It was becoming clear that these assessments were more than simple inspections. Tell Admiral Chen I'll be there, within the hour. The journey to Station 7 took him through the rebuilt sections of Aegis Prime. The massive space station had been expanded dramatically since the battle, with new sections that incorporated both council and human technology. The fusion was impressive. But Zethkar couldn't shake the feeling that the human additions were somehow watching everything that happened in the council sections. The docking bay for the human ship was unlike anything in council design. The walls were covered with what looked like living metal that shifted and flowed as he watched. Security scanners that examined him at the molecular level made his crystal structure tingle with energy. Everything about the space whispered of technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. Admiral Chen met him at the airlock, looking exactly as she had during the battle 6 months ago. Her uniform was crisp, her expression was professional, and her eyes held the same cold intelligence that had terrified him the first time he saw her. "Admiral Zethkar," she said with a slight nod. "Thank you for coming. I hope the journey wasn't too inconvenient." "Not at all, Admiral Chen. I must say your ship is quite impressive. I've never seen technology that integrates organic and mechanical systems so seamlessly." "The Prometheus is one of our newer designs," she replied, as she led him through corridors that seemed to shift and adapt to their presence. "We've incorporated some of the swarm's better ideas into our own technology. Waste not, want not, as we say." The casual mention of incorporating swarm technology made Zethkar's crystal structure go cold. The humans hadn't just destroyed their enemy. They had studied them, learned from them, and made themselves stronger with the knowledge. They entered what appeared to be a conference room, though the walls displayed a real-time view of space around the ship. Zethkar could see council vessels in the distance, but he noticed that human ships outnumbered them 3-1. "Please sit," Admiral Chen said, gesturing to a chair that molded itself to accommodate his crystalline physiology. "I wanted to discuss the current state of galactic security with you." "Of course. The Council is very grateful for the human presence in our territories. The peace these past months has been maintained by human forces," Chen interrupted smoothly. "Which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. The Human Defense Consortium has completed its security assessment of Council space." She activated a holographic display that showed the entire galaxy. Zethkar was surprised to see that human ships were positioned not just in former Council territories, but throughout most of known space. "As you can see," Chen continued, "we've established patrol routes covering all major trade corridors, resource systems, and population centers. Our forces have eliminated 17 potential threats that could have developed into swarm-level problems." 17 threats? Zethkar asked. "I wasn't aware there were any significant dangers remaining." "Most species aren't aware of dangers until they become existential crises," Chen replied. "That's the problem with reactive defense strategies. By the time you recognize a threat, it's often too late to stop it efficiently." The holographic display zoomed in on various systems, showing human installations and patrol fleets. Zethkar noticed that every major council world now had a human presence, usually described as a security outpost or monitoring station. "The Council appreciates your vigilance," he said carefully, "but some of our member species have expressed concern about the level of human presence in their systems." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew colder. "Concern about what specifically?" "Well, there have been questions about sovereignty. Some species feel that their internal affairs are being monitored more closely than necessary for security purposes." "Admiral Zethkar," Chen said, leaning back in her chair, "let me explain something about human philosophy regarding security. We don't believe in half measures. When we commit to protecting something, we protect it completely." The holographic display changed to show detailed information about various council species. Economic data, military capabilities, political structures, even social trends and cultural developments. The level of detail was staggering. "You've been conducting intelligence operations," Zethkar said, his voice barely concealing his shock. "We've been conducting threat assessments," Chen corrected. The swarm wasn't the only danger in this galaxy. Political instability, economic inequality, technological proliferation, social unrest, all of these can lead to conflicts that threaten galactic peace. But surely internal political affairs are a matter for each species to decide independently. The Cathari Republic thought their internal politics were independent too, Chen said, activating another display. "Right up until their civil war started producing weapons that could have destabilized 3 nearby systems. We intervened before the situation became a regional crisis." Zethkar remembered the Cathari situation. The humans had arrived with a small fleet and somehow negotiated an end to the civil war within hours. Both sides had agreed to a peaceful resolution and the establishment of a human-mediated government. At the time, it had seemed like brilliant diplomacy. Now he was beginning to understand the real story. "Admiral Chen, he said slowly. Are you telling me that the Human Defense Consortium is establishing a form of oversight over council affairs? I'm telling you that we're establishing a stable galactic order, she replied. The council species have proven repeatedly that they can't maintain peace without external intervention. Left to your own devices, you fight wars, develop dangerous technologies, and create the kind of instability that breeds existential threats. The display showed a timeline of council history, highlighting conflicts, technological disasters, and political crises. Viewed from this perspective, the past 1,000 years of galactic civilization looked like an endless series of near catastrophes. The humans have a saying, Chen continued. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Your species have forgotten how to maintain order because you've never had to face real consequences for disorder. And you're going to provide those consequences? Zethkar asked. We're going to provide stability, Chen corrected. The consortium has developed protocols for maintaining galactic peace that are far more effective than anything the Council has attempted. We'll implement these protocols gradually, with minimal disruption to existing social structures. The hologram changed again, showing what appeared to be organizational charts for Council governments, but the charts had been modified, with human advisors and oversight committees integrated into every level of authority. This is conquest, Zethkar said quietly. This is evolution, Chen replied. The galaxy is entering a new phase of development. The age of independent species struggling against each other and against external threats is ending. The age of coordinated civilization under unified leadership is beginning. Unified leadership? You mean human leadership? I mean competent leadership. Admiral, in the 6 months since the swarm was eliminated, human-managed territories have seen a 300% increase in economic efficiency, a 90% reduction in crime, and 0 military conflicts. These aren't accidents. These are the results of applying human organizational principles to galactic governance. Zethkar couldn't argue with the statistics. Human-managed systems were indeed more stable and prosperous than they had been under Council administration. But the cost of that stability was becoming clear. What happens to species that refuse to accept this new order? He asked. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same cold certainty it had during the battle against the swarm. Admiral, in our experience, species that refuse to accept stable governance usually have reasons that threaten galactic security. Pirates refuse because they profit from chaos. Warlords refuse because they prefer local dominance to universal peace. Aggressive expansionist cultures refuse because they want to conquer rather than coexist. And what about species that simply want to govern themselves? Self-governance is a privilege that must be earned through demonstrated competence. The Council species had 3,000 years to prove they could maintain galactic stability. The result was a war that nearly led to universal extinction. The truth of her words was undeniable. But Zethkar found himself thinking about his homeworld, about the crystal gardens his people had tended for millions of years, about the philosophical traditions that had guided his species since before they reached the stars.